The DNA data bank had been created, and so they took the crime scene DNA evidence and put it in the data bank, and it matched the actual perpetrator, and whose DNA was only in the data bank because left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed his second victim 3.5 years later. So the conviction was overturned. I was released, and he was, arrested and convicted of the crime. When he was confronted with the DNA evidence that matched him, he admitted he was the one who did the crime.
Even for those who are guilty, all of the things you said about the pictures and the TVs and the movies and the games are all ways to get outside of the prison, for a short while. But, you not being guilty of the crime and coming in there as a teenager with a life sentence, it doesn't surprise me that there were all these different strategies you used in order to help yourself survive. And thank God for having met Mr. Sterling and this other pen pal. One of these stereotypes that many people have about people in prison is that everybody claims that they're innocent. And in my experience, that's just not the case. Most people, what you will find more often is that people think they got a raw deal, that they got maybe more time than they should have, but there's not a whole lot of people saying that they are just completely innocent of what they were accused of. So, I understand you met up with this guy, and as it turns out, he was exonerated as well. So you weren't foolishly believing in somebody who was just, lying and hustling. But, there's a lot of people in there who are innocent, and it's just not the case that most people in prison are all, claiming innocence. So.
Right. In fact, innocence is really not something that's spoken about in prison because, first of all, you would not want to draw attention to yourself. I certainly didn't want to because innocent of what? And then the charges are out, and then, I got to deal with that prison aspect of it. But also, maintaining your innocence in prison. Another reason why people don't do that is because there's the concern that if you get awarded another trial, but you have to go back to trial again, that somebody in there will falsely say that you confessed to them so that they could go home early. So that would be another reason why you would not do that. And, I refused to take the sex offender training program because it had a guilt admission requirement tied to it. And I similarly maintained my innocence at the parole board, which was one of the couple of reasons. So they used that was part of the reason why I was turned down for parole. And of course, they referenced nature of the crime as well, which doesn't make any sense because the judge already knew what the charges and facts were. That was why he gave me the sentence that he did. So the denied parole based on that is you're resentencing me. So in those contexts, it actually works against you, in those settings to maintain your innocence. And, they refused to drop my security level from maximum to minimum. And, they refused to let me participate in the family reunion program, which involved, there was trailers on the prison grounds and your family could come up in the morning and they could stay there with you all the way up until Sunday morning. And so because I refused to take this sex offender program, I wasn't allowed to participate in this. I wasn't allowed to apply to be an honor block, which might sound laughable to people listening. But look, any creature comfort you can get in prison is precious. So in the honor block, they had a stove and a refrigerator. You could go to recreation every night, and you could have recreation on the gallery in a day room rather than having to go out to the yard. So it was less dangerous. So they refused to transfer me. At the end, they refused to transfer me closer to home. I stayed in Elmira for a decade. Which was like 4.5 hours away. So they did everything in their power to try to force me into taking this program and making a guilt admission.
Yeah, and just to sum up, what you're saying is that there are internal factors which would prevent someone or cause them to shy away from maintaining innocence.
That's right.
The culture in the prison, and then the institutional culture of you're maintaining innocence and not wanting to go to these sex offender programs, and all of that factored against you such that you were denied parole.
Yes.
Well, so at what point does the Innocence Project get involved? And
at the end, yeah, I'll tell you that. So I lost 7 appeals, by the way, and quickly, my issue on appeal was my innocence based on the DNA. that there was legally insufficient evidence, that the prosecution hadn't proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the verdict was against the weight of the evidence. The confession being admitted in violation of my constitutional rights was an issue. The evidence being thrown out, the polygraphist being allowed to repeatedly tell the jury I failed. Those were all issues. There were 10 issues of law that were covered and that were argued. The court ruled that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which doesn't make any sense because the DNA didn't match me. They ruled that I was not in custody. I was free to come and go as I wanted, and so therefore the statements were voluntary. And then they knocked out all the rest of the other issues by ruling that they were either not preserved for review or else they didn't have any merit. And so they ruled against me 5-0, and it was all downhill from there. The re-argument motion was denied in one word, denied. Court of Appeals declined to give me permission to appeal to them. I lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure. And so my petition arrived 4 days too late, which the district attorney at the time, Janine Pirro, her office took the position that those 4 days were prejudicial to the government. And so they urged the court to simply rule I was late. And that's what happened. So I challenged that ruling in the next two courts in front of Judge Sotomayor and her colleague, and they upheld that ruling twice. And then I went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they declined to give me permission to appeal to them. So that was the end of my appeals, and therefore I no longer was provided an attorney. As you know, the only way back into court when that happens is if you find some new evidence, or else they've changed the law and applied it retroactively. So I wrote letters for 4 years looking for an attorney or an investigator to take my case for free because I didn't have any money to hire an investigator. Obviously, the hope was that they would find some new evidence. Wrote letters for 4 years that, rarely getting any answers. Got denied parole. We covered that. At one of those letters that I wrote in care of a book author. By that point, by the way, I was so hard up for coming up with ideas of new places and people to write to. I mean, I didn't just write legal entities. If I could come up with a line of reasoning by which somebody could do something that would set in motion a chain of events that culminated into my I wrote letters. So I was going to the general library in order to get ideas and addresses to write looking for legal help. So I guess to make a long story short, which is probably already too late, one of those letters that I sent to a book author in care of the publishing company was instead sent to an investigator, and she connected me to the Innocence Project. She suggested I write them. She lobbied them, got other people to lobby them. I got lucky that one of the intake workers at the Innocence Project, when the lawyers did not want to go forward with my case because the DNA already didn't match me. So the way that they would do it is they would just take cases where DNA testing could be done and then introduce it to the court as duly discovered evidence. But they couldn't do that in my case because it wasn't new. It was known already. So when they didn't want to go forward with the case, the intake worker, Maggie Taylor, presented the case to them several more times, eventually getting them to agree to it. So getting their representation in year 16 was the key. Second thing is Pirro left office and her successor was willing to let me get the testing. And the third thing was that the DNA data bank had been created. And so they took the crime scene DNA evidence and put it in the data bank, and it matched the actual perpetrator. And, whose DNA was only in the data bank because left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed his second victim 3.5 years later. So the conviction was overturned. I was released. That was on September 22nd, 2006, and reported back to the court November 2nd, 2006, at which point all the charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds, and he was, arrested and convicted of the crime. When he was confronted with the DNA evidence that matched him, he admitted he was the one who did the crime.
Right. So the DNA leads back to this other person who, in the interim, killed someone else
Yes.
by strangulation. Am I correct in that? His other victim.
Yes, you are correct in that. Yes, you are. You are correct.
And that was the case with Angela as well. Right?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
So who did you happen to know who this guy was? Was he your age? Was he another
He was
teenager?
not. No, at the no. Yeah. So I did not know him. He was. So at the time of the crime, Angela was 15. I was 16, and he was a 29-year-old who was a drug addict. I know I had several drug convictions. I had never met him a day in my life. And what happened, well, the backstory on everything was that one of Angela's classes was a photography class. The teacher assigned everybody, to take pictures of foliage, and he assigned a buddy system, and there was a male student who was supposed to accompany Angela to take pictures, and he played hooky on the assignment. For some reason, she ran out of her house, so her and her sister walked home. The sister went to the restroom. She came back out. Angela was gone. She decided to spread her wings, I guess. I mean, just to go and do something on her own finally. So she went to the park to take pictures. She was in this wooded area taking pictures, where she had the misfortune of coming across this drug addict who was high and in the wooded area. And, he strangled her, and, he murdered and raped her.
So once you're set free, I mean, first of all, I just want you to be encouraged. I'm sure you've heard this many times over, but having gone through all of that and denied and rejection after rejection and not having any money and even being hindered by the prison system to prevent you from reaching out and writing people, but you just kept going is truly commendable, heroic even after, over, decades. This is just crazy. So you're released. Now you have your life back. But what were your plans? I mean, did you already have in mind, this is what I'm going to do, with my life? Did you wanted, clearly you ended up in law school. You wanted to pursue law. I mean, what was that like, just getting out and what do I do now?
Yeah. So, I was told that I was going home the day before that I was going home, and I went from the prison to the court, and then I was, released. It was all kind of very, very shocking and all together. I mean, I actually didn't believe it when my lawyer told me, and it took, there was like a 3.5 hours of my not believing it and having mental paralysis before I finally came to accept that it was going to happen. And that lasted for about 5 minutes. And then a different fear, which was, I thought, well, something's going to happen between today and tomorrow, and the DA is going to change her mind, and I'm not going to be going anywhere. So, I gave this off-the-cuff presentation at the press conference after first saying, "Is this really happening?" And everything I ever wanted to say in 16 years, but could never get anyone to hear me say, all just kind of came out. And so I held the press there for 2.5 hours. After all the, and there was we had a celebratory luncheon and everything, but from there I went to my aunt's house, and I felt out of place. I couldn't relate to, the people seated around the table with me who were having coffee and pastries. And, I just went outside and just wanted to stay outside in the dark because they would always close the prison yard. So, I really couldn't relate to anybody. There was nobody to party with. Overall, I was kind of like, a light bulb went off in my head when I did speak, and I thought, well, I could be part of the innocence movement without necessarily being a lawyer. And so for about 5 years, I was an individual advocate. So I was doing speaking engagements. I met somebody whose nephew was a concert promoter, and he decided to help me on my speaking career. And then there was a newspaper that had been started a couple of months in Westchester that just before I was released. And so they interviewed me as a subject for a story, but they ended up offering me an opportunity to write for the paper as a columnist. So I got started that way. And there was a debate in New York about whether the death penalty should be brought back or not, because 3 different state troopers had been killed in unrelated murders, and so the pro-death penalty people were using that. And I had been released a few months, before that, and so I was the moral counterweight argument to that, working with New Yorkers against the death penalty. And so my point in saying that is that that was how I got started doing lobbying, and I figured out that I could keep the media attention coming if I could just give them a new angle, some new spin or something new I was doing. So I did that for about 5 years. I was kind of directionless other than that as to what I wanted to do with my life, but I was kind of foolishly thinking I was too old to go back to college. But then a dean, the then dean at Mercy College, saw I was 10 classes short of the bachelor's, and she gave me the scholarship. She arranged for me to have a scholarship for Mercy College to finish the bachelor's degree. I had all these interventions from strangers, basically, at the right place at the right time, who just played a limited, though significant role for me.
Yeah, well, thank God for all those people. You're in your 30s at this point, right?
I am 32.
Was there any significant reception from high school classmates you may have known, or were people?
Yeah, people reached out to me. Yeah, there was, but it was mainly them reaching out to me through social media. They didn't live in the area anymore. People reached out and said a sentimental word or two, or expressed regret, or but that was really as far as it got. I loved it when I was at Peekskill that first couple of weeks, because people would honk. They would honk the horn and they would wave to me, and they would come up to me and shake hands with me, and that felt really good. Of course, none of those people were the people that lived in Peekskill before. That was the hostile. So so that was that part of it. But it was very difficult for me, though. But it wasn't all peaches and cream. I mean, I was released with nothing. It took me 5 years to get anything. So I was always passed over for gainful employment. I was making money as a weekly columnist. They wanted one article a week, though. And I was making money doing speaking engagements, but, that's not a consistent form of income.
Yeah.
So I was always passed. So, I lacked stability of housing. I bounced from place to place at one point, coming a couple of weeks from the homeless shelter. But Mercy College just gave me the scholarship, allowed me to live on campus. And so that was how I avoided that. There was the world was different. GPS, cell phone, internet hadn't been created. Culture was different. Peekskill and surrounding areas, other cities didn't look the same. So cumulatively, it felt like I was in a parallel world to a place that wasn't my own. I had to deal with the psychological after effects. I had PTSD related symptoms like panic attacks, anxiety, feeling of processing things at a slower speed, fear on seeing law enforcement, feeling of having been frozen in time. So I was released when I was 32. I felt like I was 17. While very few questioned my innocence, mainly because the actual perpetrator was arrested and convicted, nonetheless, there was a stigma around me. I had been in prison for 16 years wrongfully, yes, but I was there for 16 years. So how much of that rubbed off on me? Is it safe to be alone someplace with me? So that worked against me. And lastly, it was very lonely. I mean, I still wanted to throw a ball around or go to an amusement park, do the bumper cars, or, what experience nightlife and do all kind of sporting activities. But there was no one to do anything with. So it was lonely. That's my point. It was lonely.
Yeah, and there's not many people who went through what you went through who could relate. So did you so you basically just said I had questions about coming back to society and what that was like, and so you explained the personal loss and struggles. Were there any institutional setbacks? Was your background cleared immediately, or did you?
Yes.
Because you did have a 16. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it was cleared legally, yes, but there was a 16-year gap. So when I would apply for jobs, I wouldn't necessarily want to tell people that. But there was the gap, and sometimes I was asked about it, and so after that happened a couple of times, and people were kind of skeptical. Yep. Then I switched tactics, and I was just upfront with it. Only that didn't work either. Yeah. It seemed like everybody wanted somebody who could hit the ground running. They didn't seem to be patient to want to give any type of on-the-job training. So,
yeah, I'm sure that was really difficult, especially trying to explain yourself to people whose default assumption was probably cynical and skeptical in the first place. That just seems to be the immediate reaction we often have. So I can imagine that was extremely frustrating for you after all this time, wrongfully convicted, being exonerated, and now you have to explain it all to everyone to their satisfaction in order for them to just give you a chance.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that sucks. I mean, I go through that as well, but I did what I did and you were innocent. It was just 16 years taken away from you, out of this huge chunk. So you eventually get into law school, and now you've started the Deskovic Foundation, you're helping not only DNA related cases, but as I saw on your site, non-DNA cases as well. So just say a little bit about law school and then the founding of your foundation.
Sure. So after being an individual advocate, as I described, for 5 years, and really only being able to just do the public education and the policy piece, just being able to nibble on the edges in terms of freeing people. I was limited. Sometimes lawyers wanted to use my name in a press release that I was attending court to bring attention to their client for, whatever value that would have. They'd want me to show up in the courtroom for the visual effect because some of the judges recognized me. And, the theory was, well, if they see me here in support of Joe Blow, then maybe there's something here. Maybe I need to pay just a little bit more attention to this one. That was what their theory was. And I wrote articles about people's cases while they were still fighting a wrongful conviction, later on were exonerated. But that was just nibbling on the edges. And when I was finally compensated after 5 years, I took a portion of the money that I received, $1.5 million from that, and I started the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. And we have, and with the support staff, just continuing the policy and education piece, but getting involved in trying to free people. And overall, we have been able to free 13 people. We take both DNA and non-DNA cases. I said free, not exonerate. Some of them were exonerations. Others were getting people out on parole while they maintained their innocence. And so we did that, and we helped pass 3 laws: videotaping interrogations, identification reform, DNA database expansion. Became an advisory board member of a coalition group called It Could Happen to You, which the foundation is part of, and we passed an additional 6 laws. We passed the independent oversight board for prosecutors, the first in the country. We improved, we did discovery reform. So the process by which evidence and information is shared by the defense and prosecution automatically early in the process, whereas previously evidence would be disclosed on the eve of trial and on the eve of hearings. So we improved that, and we started chapters, and using that model of statewide coalition, we started chapters in Pennsylvania and California. And so I'm active in all 3, doing policy work there. Got a master's degree from John Jay College. My thesis was on wrongful conviction cause and reform. I figured the extra credential would help me. And at some point, I became not satisfied with sitting in the front row of the courtroom. And I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table, make some of the arguments, represent some of the clients. Hence, going into law school and ultimately becoming a lawyer. I did have to overcome some adversity there. I mean, initially I did not get into law school, and then I tried again 7 years later and got in the next time around. And, I have entered into some of the cases as co-counsel, and I'm going to be taking the lead on a few cases also. I want to give a mention to a few other groups that I've affiliated with. I'm on the board for the National Justice, the soon-to-be launching National Justice Impacted Bar Association, whose goal is to encourage formerly incarcerated people, regardless of whether or not innocent or guilty, to become lawyers, enter the legal field, ultimately become lawyers. And I do sit on the Global Advisory Council for Restorative Justice International, advising them on wrongful conviction issues and other criminal justice issues. I haven't forgotten a lot of injustices that I faced, aside from innocence and really disturbing things that I witnessed as well. And so when the documentary short about me called Conviction, 20-minute short, which is on Netflix, when it came out, I used some of the platform that I had in order to shine some light on those issues. I talked about things like, the prisoner, the staff to prisoner verbal abuse. I mean, elderly people in prison, the terrible medical care, and how the medical care, while bad, was particularly inept when it came to dealing with advanced medical needs, and compassionate release, whereby terminally ill prisoners can apply for early release in order to die with dignity, with family and friends in a normal environment, and how often how cold and uncaring the system was, and how often by the time decisions were made, people either died already or they died a day or two later after being granted and removing college education from prison, and people over sentenced. I saw people there that had more time for drug possession, that people who killed people and committed other acts of violence, and that was backwards. And solitary confinement, which I was subjected to once for 28 days, because I attempted to defend myself against people that I felt were coming to stab me because, the vigilante mentality. So I talked about all those things, and, the parole board system, and how anyone convicted of anything violent would be just denied by default. And the parole board would do that rather than what they were supposed to do by law and statute, which is to determine if somebody has been rehabilitated, evaluating what programs they've completed, what their disciplinary record is like, and how that was just a complete abandonment of any idea of belief in rehabilitation and a second chance, and how that was really demotivating a lot of prisoners. People would say to me, Jeff, why should I bother taking any programs or changing? They're just going to deny me parole anyway. So I talked about those things. And my point in saying all of that is to set the table for me to briefly mention that I have been involved in some non-innocence justice reform work. I've volunteered quite a bit of time working as a volunteer with RAP, Release Aging People in Prison, as we pushed parole reform change in New York, coming very close to, we actually did pass one measure, help pass it, less is more, which is a proposition that states that previously people on parole could be returned back to prison for a year or two for a technical violation, such as your curfew's 8 o'clock and you came back at 8:10, or, not reporting your change of address. And no one's saying people should be able to break rules, but, proportionality here is what we're talking about. So we helped pass that, but we're working on fair and timely parole, which means that the board wouldn't be able to cite nature of the crime as the only reason in determining and denying parole. We're working on that. I've worked on that. I continue to work on that till that's done. And the companion bill to that referred to in shorthand as elder parole. So it's a proposition that states that if a prisoner is 55 and they've also served 15 years in prison, then they would be eligible for just a parole board hearing, not automatic release. So we worked on that. And of course, the fear mongering, if it's a serial rapist, if it's a serial killer, well, that would mean that this person would be, no, it would not. It would mean that they'd have a hearing. And look, if they could demonstrate they were rehabilitated, then why not? I mean, it's kind of hard for me to imagine that they would be able to demonstrate that. But if they could, I mean, do we believe in a second chance or we don't? And just seeing people with college degrees or living in honor block or serving as role models in prison, and totally different people than they were 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. And to see them denied parole, when they really should be granted. And knowing that there are a lot of guilty formerly incarcerated people that are making very meaningful contributions to society in one way or another, working in professions like teaching or prisoner reentry, diverting at-risk youth from ending up in prison, and how as a society we're deprived of those contributions when people who could be safely released on parole are not. So that instead of having people paying into the tax base, they're draining the system. And really we're talking about mothers and fathers, grandmothers, grandpas, sons and daughters, these people, just the impact on the family as well. So making all those arguments towards, parole reform, all that stuff really disturbed me. I was subjected to some of it, and, I witnessed other parts of it. And so really none of that stuff has a place in civilized society. If someone is incarcerated, the punishment is supposed to be the loss of your freedom. It's not supposed to be that you're going to be sent to prison for the purpose of being mistreated.
Yeah, all of that, I couldn't have had you explain it any better. I wanted to ask some very practical explanations you would have for what can be done to reform the justice system. And so you described, the videotape, confessions and expanding the DNA database, but then you also talked about non-innocence related work in parole reform and with the elderly in medical care. So that has become what your life is about now, is justice.
Yes, it has. It really has. Yeah. I mean, I do this 24/7. This, I have a purpose, I have a mission in life. And, with that, I mean, I took something negative, turn it into a positive, and then having a meaning in life, a higher calling that I've answered, I have some inner peace with that, and I'm making a difference. I'm not an angry or bitter person. I mean, I want to enjoy my life as much as I can, and I can't do that if I'm angry or bitter. I feel like I lost so much already. Why would I want to, in effect, lose the rest of my life? And if I was angry or bitter, it's not like I'd be impacting other people that were responsible for what happened to me. I would really be the only loser in that scenario. And so the vehicle that allows me to actualize that is I take that energy and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do. That's my release, and it's healing, and it's cathartic, and it makes a difference. In terms of making the system better, I want to quickly mention just, one of the big things I'm doing is that oversight board for prosecutors that we did pass in New York, that landmark bill. We are trying to export that to Pennsylvania and California. The ultimate goal would be to do that, nationally. And many states still, they don't videotape interrogations. They don't use the best identification procedures. They don't have the oversight for the prosecutors. Some places like Pennsylvania, they don't even have compensation. So we're working on, that's the main goal, myself and the rest of my colleagues, and we could have to do a coalition of working on in Pennsylvania. I feel strongly that we have to level the playing field. The district attorney's office shouldn't have one budget and the public defenders have another. We should have the parity, so there could be equal resources financially and manpower wise, experts and investigators. I mean, now, the way it is now, it's not uncommon for one public defender to represent 100 people at the same time, and have to resort to asking for discretionary funding for experts and investigators. And most of the time, those are denied. The judges try to keep the cost of trials down in the county, and having both equal pay for both sides, because being a prosecutor is not more important than being a defense lawyer. They're really both essential. So doing those things and, trying to build consensus, I do consider justice reform to be about accuracy and justice, and not anti-law enforcement. And so with that message and positioning it that way, the last 5 years I have co-taught the ethics class for a police academy. I've done presentations in front of prosecutorial groups and district attorney offices. I've spoken in front of groups of judges on various wrongful conviction topics. And so I do try to build consensus for the purpose of moving justice reform. And look, I'm a big person on education and accountability for law enforcement. It's not a few bad apples. It's a lot more than that. There would not be all these police brutality cases and unjustifiable deadly police force. There would not be the 2,883 exonerations to date nationally, just from 1989 forward, per the National Registry Exoneration. But at the same time, I don't paint everyone with the same brush. I also know that there's good and bad in the police and in the prosecutors, and if someone's doing their job in an ethical, legal, and constitutional way, then I have no problem with them. I think the world would be scary with no law enforcement in it, and I'm not a defund guy. If I call the police, I don't want to be put on hold. I want an officer showing up. I don't want a social worker or mental health person, but I do think that they should be trained better to deal with people with mental health crises, and there should be accountability when something wrong is done, for sure. So, and I say that openly in interviews and in speeches and everything else, and I think it plays very well. And those are, core beliefs that I have.
Yeah. No, I thank you for saying that. That's always one of those things I never know when I'm speaking to someone if they even want to comment on some of the more controversial issues of the time. Being a convicted felon, I don't have any ill will towards law enforcement generally. Like you said, it's a difference between, like reform and just defunding it completely. But there's a lot of nuance there. But I'm glad that you said that and you pointed those things out. And also, just your whole story is fascinating. I said at the beginning, I didn't want to call it fascinating because it's tragic, but everything that you're doing now, people didn't have to be unjustly convicted in order to devote their life to justice and its reform. But you've done that, and it's led you to have a very unique perspective. I think it's commendable that you've given your life over to defending the innocent and also defending the guilty, but in a humane way, making things better than they currently are, both for the convicted felons and also for the law enforcement. So all of those nuances, I couldn't have asked you to say any of those things better. I had all of them on my mind. And the last question was really a big picture question about, how do you understand the meaning of life and having purpose in life? And you did begin to touch on that with your involvement in justice. So if you could just say a little bit more about that, and then
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I would say making a difference, and I do have my higher purpose. I do believe that that's why everything happened to me in that higher kaleidoscopic type of way. And if I could give a few words of advice, so, I've that are really general, that can apply to anybody in any walk of life. So I would say, have a goal, right? Have a realistic plan. You should be able to look at it 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, I could see how this might work. Because who wants to carry out a plan that you don't think has a chance of being successful? Yeah. Be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal. The plan's not the goal. So if an unexpected door opens for you and it moves towards that goal, then don't decline to walk through it just because it wasn't part of your plan. Work really hard. I don't believe that, most of the time things are not going to change. Not going to just fall on your lap just because, you've got to work really hard for. You got to put yourself in position for, a miracle to happen, a door to open, someone to give you, lower their hand to pull you up, and never give up. When you can't go anymore, remember that might be the key moment. And if you had just kept going, then you might have had the breakthrough. So keep going, even though you can't, and just to see what happens on the other, the other side. And when you do get to the other side, you need to reach back and help people in a similar position and do some work on the preventative side. In my 14 years of being home, I've seen people apply that, whether they're someone that's been sexually abused or trafficked. I've seen I was at a fundraising event for someone who's raising money to help people to pay to so people would help to free the people that are, that's just like a law enforcement type of thing, but they have companies that try to rescue people that have been, trafficked. So she was doing that, and I've seen formerly incarcerated people that, work at diverting at-risk youth, or, somebody that's been a victim of domestic abuse, and now they're helping relocate and helping other people who are currently in those situations. It could be somebody that's been discriminated against, or has, faced racism, or, so maybe a debilitating illness. I mean, really, it could really, and things less dramatic than that, but it can apply to everybody. And if you can do that, then you can make your suffering count for something. It'll be meaningful, it'll be healing, it'll make the world a little bit better. And I just encourage people to find their purpose and apply that formula, in whatever adversity they've overcome.
How can somebody contact you, or either to donate to the Deskovic Foundation or to make contact with you to potentially work with you on their case?
Sure. In terms of contacting me, I do have the website, www.deskovic.org. There is a email form that people can email me through there. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and people can, message me that way. My email address is jeff@deskovic.org. In terms of donating, as you see in the background, we do have there is a page on the website Patreon, which is for people who are willing to be recurring monthly donors. My dream is, what if there were 25,000 people that, could afford $3 to $5 on a recurring monthly basis? That would give us a really large budget, and that would help us to free additional wrongfully convicted people and to push policy reforms and beyond just the 3 states that we're working on now. I mean, if politicians of either party can raise tens of millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars through small dollar donations, as they term it, why can't we do that for justice reform? We have a really good track record, and that's just a really small budget. My ultimate dream is to have a chapter of the foundation in each state and ultimately in each country, because I really see wrongful conviction and as a worldwide issue. In countries where we don't hear about wrongful convictions, it's not because they don't happen, it's because they're not being caught and corrected. Nobody's doing nobody's doing the work.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for meeting with me this morning. I know you're busy. You're involved in so many great efforts at the macroscopic and the microscopic level in helping the innocent and even the guilty, and in both people in prison and also law enforcement. I think it's just really amazing. And you've got a lot of great things to say about a really unique perspective. So thanks so much for meeting with me. And I hope that we continue to stay in touch. I'm going to find you on LinkedIn. I don't think you're on my LinkedIn page. So yeah, I hope to continue to network with you and speak to you again sometime.
I would love that very much. And thank you again for having me on your show.
All right. Thanks. You have a great day.
Thanks. You too.